I am pleased to be here with the students this morning at the West Virginia Solution Seekers Student Leadership Conference. As president of Marshall University, I encourage a lot of outstanding young leaders who are doing great things today and certainly have the opportunity to change the world in the future in many positive ways. I appreciate the work of all the planners that they put into today's program, and especially for Sarah Payne Scarborough and her dedication and hard work and her ideas. And I think it's great that we're having this student session today. We know that we're going to be in a special treat for you today as we engage a West Virginia kid who grew up and then went on to make it big. After I introduce our keynote speaker, I will allow him to make a few introductory comments, and then I will interview him in a fireside chat format. Brad D. Smith currently is the executive chairman of the software giant Intuit, and he was formerly its president and CEO. Brad was born in Huntington, West Virginia, and raised in Canova, West Virginia, which is 8 miles down the road right next to Kentucky. He attributes much of his success to the traditional West Virginia values he was taught by his parents. He learned the value of hard work, integrity, humility, and teamwork right there in Canova, West Virginia. Brad graduated from Marshall University in 1986 with a bachelor degree in business administration with an emphasis in marketing. He also has a master's in management from Aquinas College, and he has had a number of positions such as with companies such as PepsiCo, 7-Up, and ADP. In 2003, Brad moved to Intuit and had a meteoric rise up through the ranks to become president and CEO. And then he became chairman in 2016. Brad's business savvy is legendary. He transformed Intuit's products and its work environment. He was named among the top CEOs in America by Fortune magazine and weighed in at an impressive number 6. I say not bad from a kid from Canova, West Virginia. Brad is a man whose many experiences have shaped who he is. I attribute the influence of his wife, Elise, and his daughters, Peyton and Devin, in helping him develop a sensitive and kind nature, which has given him an edge in motivating his employees and in understanding people, both critical for success in business. Brad is not only a kind person, but he's also a generous person. Brad has been generous to his home state of West Virginia and also to Marshall University. Just recently, in a partnership with his wife, Elise, Brad established the Wing to Wing Foundation. The goal of Wing to Wing is to provide small communities like those in West Virginia with entrepreneurial resources and funding and provide a foundation for aspiring business leaders. And as for Marshall, Brad and Elise have made one of the largest gifts in the history of Marshall in giving $25 million for our College of Business. Next year, we will break ground on a state-of-the-art building on 4th Avenue, the Brad D. Smith Center for Business and Innovation, the future home of Marshall's Lewis College of Business. I will now turn it over to our colleague and our friend Brad Smith for a few comments before we start our conversation. Good morning, Brad.
Good morning, President Gilbert. You're such a good friend and such a great leader, and I appreciate those kind words. You and I have often joked that my preference would be simply to say, this is Brad from Canova. As you and I also understand that pretty much says it all. What we have in West Virginia is very special, from our parents to our communities to these amazing students to great institutions like Marshall and great leaders like you who form and shape this next generation. And I'm just a byproduct of that. If I could borrow Ben Ng's statements, anytime anyone ever says something nice about someone who's been a CEO or a leader, they're really just lucky that they worked with a great group of people and had the chance to do something that basically helped change somebody's life or potentially impact the world. And that's pretty much my description of my career. So I'm looking forward to the chance to spend time with this young group of amazing change agents. I was so inspired by their stories I love the honorees. And I think this is a very important moment in time because this is an intersection of our historical accomplishments and our future possibilities for each of us as individuals and for our great state of West Virginia. And you're making a lot of this happen, President Gilbert. So I'll go ahead and hand it back over to you because I know there's questions that you have and the students have, and I'm looking forward to hearing what's on everyone's mind.
Well, normally, Brad and I would be seated in very comfortable chairs on a stage, and we'd probably have in front of us a glass of water each, and we would be looking at each other, and I would be asking him questions in a very informal manner. So we're going to try to duplicate that. I'm on one side of the country, and he's on the other. Believe it or not, it's quite early in California. So we've been up a little longer here in West Virginia, but we are delighted that Brad is with us and he's willing to share some of his insights with these students. And as I mentioned earlier, Brad, I think you are grounded and you've been grounded in your life by the values and lessons that you developed growing up in West Virginia. So I want to start by asking you a question related to that fact. Could you share with us some of your memorable experiences of growing up in West Virginia?
Oh, I certainly can. I think we're blessed to grow up in West Virginia. We sometimes forget about that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But I had an idyllic childhood. I grew up in Canova, as you described, population 3,000 if you round up. I had an amazing set of parents. I'm the middle of three sons. I have friends that have lasted me an entire lifetime. We swam in the Ohio River. I lifeguarded at Dreamland Pool in the summer. I taught martial arts to try to make some extra money. I graduated from a high school that's since been consolidated into the Spring Valley Timberwolves, but we were the Cerrito Canova Wonders. And one thing our school was known for was a pretty good football program. My senior year, we were state champions, and we actually won the state championship 10 out of 20 years. So it's a very proud community. It's a community made up of salt of the earth people. And I can truly say it was like growing up in a Norman Rockwell painting for anyone who knows who that is. It's basically Americana. But what's crazy about it, President Gilbert, is I didn't fully appreciate it. I have on my social media that for 22 years, I dreamed of a way out. And I've now lived in 10 states and I've traveled the entire world. And I can tell you, every day since leaving, I've looked for a way home. It's an incredibly special place in West Virginia.
Well, I can tell you that I love to ride bicycles, and every weekend I ride through Canova on my bicycle. And I always see Brad's childhood home, always look over to see everything's okay. And sometimes I'll send a message back to Brad, kind of rainy this morning in Canova, or sunny today, feeling good. But Canova is a beautiful small town. And it hasn't changed much over the years. It's still very much the heart of America, and I think that sort of defines who Brad is. He came from the heart of America in West Virginia. Brad, you are recognized as a leader in the world of business, but at one time you were a high school student, as you mentioned, and a college student, just like the folks on this call. In considering all the things that you did, all the activities, all of the things that you studied and read, and everything else that you did in high school and college, what one activity would a mature Brad Smith tell an adolescent and young adult Brad Smith to do more of and focus on back in high school and college?
Wow, that's a wonderful question. You know, there's so many things you learn as you get a little further along in life. And I would tell you that there's a little story that I tell about being beat in the spelling bee in the fourth grade. And it didn't make my IQ go up, but it made my work ethic go up. And as a result, I think I became a little bit of a perfectionist and I always wanted to have the right answer. It mattered to me that I tried to get 100% on every single exam and every quiz. And while that certainly paid off in terms of good grades, I've since learned in life that success is less about having the right answer all the time. And it's actually more about knowing the right question to ask. In fact, Albert Einstein once said that if he had 1 hour to solve a problem upon which his life depended, he would spend 55 minutes of that hour trying to figure out the right question to ask, because once he knew the right question, he could solve it in a matter of minutes. And so I can tell you now, President Gilbert, you and I talk about this. In life, I've come to learn and appreciate that the best team members, the best employees, the best board members, the best leaders all share one thing in common. They have a high CQ, which is a curiosity quotient. And that means they're willing to learn from others. They listen more than they speak. They're okay being wrong. And at the end of the day, they treat success and failure the same way, which is an opportunity to learn. So I would encourage my younger self, and I would encourage the students to continue to study, continue to try to get good grades, but to cultivate and embrace your curiosity quotient. Go into areas that you're not so good and be okay making mistakes and learn from those mistakes, because that's the way you grow.
You know, I tell students, and I have an opportunity to interact with students a lot. I tell them that we all learn things every day, really. And if you are a curious person, you can continue that lifelong learning. And I think you should. I tell them, you know, you should be reading every day. You should read for pleasure. You should read for your studies. You should be engaged in your stimulating your mind and trying to learn new things and being curious.
Yes.
Uh, Brad, can you tell us who was your mentor when you were growing up?
You know, someone once said this about me, and I think it's true. They said, anyone who borrows something from Brad is stealing twice because he's stolen it from somebody else. And I truly am the result of taking everyone's best practices, everyone's best quotes, everyone's best ideas, and trying to make them my own. So I had a lot of mentors. Obviously, my parents, you know, my mother taught me to dream big, to not see any boundaries or obstacles. And my dad taught me how to be authentic to who I am, not to hide my accent, you know, not to be afraid of being from a small hometown, be proud of who I am. But this may be unusual, and some members of this student audience may not recognize the name, or maybe they know the name, but not the show. But I'll share that, crazy enough, one of my greatest influences in life was Mr. Rogers and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And the reason why is because if you look at what makes a great leader, and this has been studied by all the academic institutions around the world, there are three things that makes a great leader. The first is they have a very bold and clear vision about changing the world. The second, they build a high performance environment where diverse and inclusive ideas are all a part of it. So they welcome everyone. And the third is they produce winning results, which is obviously important. And if you think about Mr. Rogers, for those who don't know, he had a very bold vision. He wanted to improve the mental and the physical well-being of children. But he wanted to do it by embracing the newest technology of his time, which, believe it or not, back then was televisions in the living room. That was a relatively new thing in the 1950s and 60s. And he took on the most contentious issues of his time. There was a Vietnam War. There was racial divide. There were increasing divorces in families. And he put these topics on his television show for 6-year-olds. And I'll share a quick example. In the 1968-69 timeframe, there was a lot of racial tension in the United States. There were a lot of riots, just a lot of bad division in our country. And down south, there were some reports of some public swimming pools that were pouring bleach in the water to try to get black kids out of the water so that white kids can swim. And it was just atrocious. Mr. Rogers, who everyone thought was just hand puppets and sing-alongs, that night put a swimming pool in the back of his studio, and one of his actors on the show, Officer Clemens, who played a black police officer, he invited him to sit down next to him and to take his shoes off and to cool his feet in the swimming pool next to Mr. Rogers. And he did that to send a signal that we are all the same and we should all be allowed to be in the swimming pools and we should all treat each other with dignity. And that was just one thing he did. His entire cast was diverse and inclusive, but the results speak for themselves, and then I'll wrap this up. For 33 years, he had the #1 rated children's show. He won 4 Emmy Awards, which is like the Super Bowl for television. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame, but perhaps most important, there's a famous quote by Maya Angelou. She's a poet. And she says, remember that in your lifetime, people will forget what you said and people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And if you ever begin to sing, it's a wonderful day in the neighborhood, a wonderful day for a neighbor, everyone's spirit lifts and they remember how Mr. Rogers made them feel. So that was one of my best mentors, President Gilbert. And quite frankly, You remind me of Mr. Rogers because you're so kind and humble, and yet you have that same impact. And that's why I absolutely have an affinity for working with you as well.
Well, I will tell the group a funny story. About 15 years ago, I was in Atlanta visiting a friend of mine, and I got on the metro, and it was pretty late at night. A bunch of inner city kids came up to me and they said, "Did anyone ever tell you that you look like Mr. Rogers?" And I said, "Well, no, not really." And they sang the song. And then I watched the movie Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, and the same thing had happened to Mr. Rogers. Of course, he really was Mr. Rogers. They sang the song to him, and it brought a tear to my eye because I realized what a tremendous compliment those kids had paid me back on that Metro car. So I too think Mr. Rogers is a wonderful person and a great example for all of us. Let me ask you a different question. How did your education at Marshall University prepare you for your career and the challenges that you encountered in your journey?
For me, I think Marshall University brings something to its education that no other institution in the world can match. And it's born out of the tragedy that we all lived through in 1970, from ashes to glory. Because Marshall instills in every single son and daughter a sense of purpose and an understanding that life's a team sport. When you get out in the world, you find out very quickly that if you can achieve your dreams alone, you're not dreaming big enough. And the way you succeed is not by being a great player, but by being a player that makes a team around you even better. And at Marshall, you learn very quickly it is not I am or you are, it is we are Marshall. And I had the chance at the age of 6 to watch that community and that university rise from that tragedy that we just talked about this past weekend when we commemorated the 50th anniversary. And the way we got through that and continue to get through that is we lock arms and we do it as a team. And so Marshall University for me instills purpose so that you believe in something bigger than yourself and teaches you how to do it as a team. And all these other universities can say we are whatever, but we are the original we are. We are Marshall.
Thank you. Brad, I know a lot of the kids that are growing up in West Virginia today are facing a lot of challenges, particularly in this year with COVID. Um, I face some myself, and I probably not to the extent that many of the students in West Virginia are facing now and have faced prior to this year. Can you share with us some of the obstacles that you had to overcome in your life, in your career as you moved along the path?
Yes, sir, I can. And I think one of the things that I've come to learn about obstacles is they really are opportunities with a lesson attached. You'll find out that you'll end up learning more from your hardest teachers, your toughest coaches, your biggest mistakes than you do from your trophies and your ribbons. And I had a handful of them that formed who I am. I alluded to some of them a few minutes ago. So I'll start with at the age of 6, living in Canova, watching television on November 14th, 1970. Across the bottom of the news screen scrolled that a plane had crashed at the Tri-State Airport, which is just about a mile and a half away from my home. And I was able to look out my bedroom window and see the sky glowing red because it was raining and it was dusk. And so it was illuminating the sky. And while I was too young to understand it at the time, I've now watched 50 Novembers go by, and I saw a community learn that life's a team sport. The second was in the 4th grade. I had a crush on a little redheaded girl, and she beat me in a spelling bee. The next day, she passed me a note because we didn't have social media. And her note said, "You can't be my boyfriend because you're stupid." And I can't say that she was wrong. I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. But as I told you, I went home and my IQ didn't go up, but my work ethic did. And I came to understand that intelligence is really applied effort. It's about getting in there and trying. The 9th grade, I had a good friend I had gone to school with from kindergarten who had started to take up boxing. And instead of practicing on the equipment, he began to practice on his friends and he became a bully. And I stood up to him and honestly, I lost. And I went home to see my mom and dad and my brothers, and I was embarrassed. And my dad sat me down and said, "Son, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's a willingness to stand up and face it." And he said, "I'm more proud of you today than I've ever been proud of you." And then he enrolled me in martial arts. And by the time I was a senior, I had a black belt. And so What I learned from that is to stand up and face the things that scare you the most. They aren't as bad as you think, and be a champion for the victims and the overlooked and underserved. So those were the sort of obstacles I had. And I'll wrap up with a very quick one because this is a kind of a funny one. When I graduated Marshall and I joined the business world, I had a really good intentioned boss who decided that he was going to send me to New York to a vocal training school because he felt my West Virginia accent didn't make me sound as educated as he thought I should sound. And I went to New York for 2 weeks and I tried every technique that they teach actors and actresses, and clearly it didn't work. And I came back and I thought, my career is over because I can't get rid of this accent. Then I began to make these public speeches, and people would come up and say, who was that young boy with that Southern twang? And I realized that that wasn't a deficit, it was an advantage. And trust me, I've been playing up my accent every day since. So be true to who you are, be authentic. That's what my dad taught me. And those were sort of the obstacles that I turned into opportunities with a lesson.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. Brad, we live in a society where winning and being successful are very highly valued, and that is very important. Um, but sometimes perhaps too much is attached to winning. Can you comment and give your perspective on the expression, the ends justify the means?
Oh, wow. You know, President Gilbert, this is an important lesson. And let me start with, if you look up the definition of what that means, the ends justify the means, it suggests that a good outcome excuses any wrongs that you would use to achieve that outcome. And quite frankly, it's false.
Right.
And it's false if you study all the statistics. So first of all, today, employees choose to join companies based upon their mission and why they exist. Do they leave the world better? Do they do things that are good for people? And they care about that more than the products they make. And we have learned that in the Silicon Valley, where we compete for top talent. If you don't have a strong purpose, a good moral fiber, you're not going to get people to join your company. The second, if you study the top 100 best places to work, Intuit has been on the list 18 consecutive years. Only one of two technology companies to have been on the list for 18 years. The other one is Cisco. And here's a little known fact. The leaders of Cisco and the leaders of Intuit both came from one state, West Virginia.
Wow.
And when you study those companies, their cultures invest as much in how you do things as they do what you do. So they are what you call what and how companies. It's not only how you win the game, but it's how many points you scored in the game. And I put all that together to say that, believe me, people in life will judge you not on how many points you scored, but whether or not you did it with dignity, with good teamwork, good sportsmanship. And this thing of the ends justify the means is completely wrong, and it's the fastest way to end your career.
Totally agree. I think that's a great segue to this next question I have, and that is, can you talk about the common mistake where some people confuse kindness in a leader with weakness?
I can. And, you know, this is where Mr. Rogers, I think, is a great example, because we all think of him as a child whisperer, and he had hand puppets and sing-alongs, and he wore this cardigan sweater every day. And people don't realize that he took on some of the most contentious issues and, quite frankly, set the standard for so many leaders and inspired an entire generation. So he was kind, but he was not weak. And at the same time, I would tell you that when you think about that phrase, it's about the ability to have a disagreement while preserving the relationship and the dignity of the person you're disagreeing with. And the best way I could describe how to do this is I'm borrowing a quote that I heard from a great leader, John Hope Bryant. He's a great Black leader that organizes the communities to help the disadvantaged and the underserved communities, many times in inner cities. And he said, the way you do this is you need to learn to speak without being offensive. You need to learn to listen without being defensive. And you need to learn to disagree while preserving, even in your greatest adversary, their personal dignity. So at the end of the day, it's about being able to be tough on the issue while respectful and kind to the person.
Thank you. Brad, how important do you think it is for a leader to seek input from different people and to surround themselves by people who represent different backgrounds and perspectives? Or to put it in other words, how important is diversity in enabling a leader to successfully make good decisions and be the best leader they can be?
This is probably the most important thing a leader can do. Because a leader, by definition, is a servant leader. They serve those that they work with. And when you look at the world, we are a mosaic. We are made up of different races, genders, creeds, ethnicities, sexual orientation, and it goes on and on and on. Introverts, extroverts. And I could never know what it feels like to be Black or Asian. I could never know what it feels like to be a female. I could never know what it feels like to have a different sexual orientation. But if I have individuals on my team that represent those groups, then I will better understand the communities I serve, the customers I serve, and the employees that I hire. And collectively, we can make better decisions. And here's a wonderful example, President Gilbert, that's been proven by the Navy SEALs, our special operations group. They take their teams through these survival exercises where you're given a list of 16 things and you're stranded on the other side of the moon. And you have to stack rank from the number one most important thing to the number 16th least important thing, what you would do. And they put you in a group of 4 people. You first are given 30 minutes by yourself to stack rank the 16 things. The average the average individual takes 10 minutes. They don't even need the full 30. Then they tell you to take your list and to get with 3 other people, and you get an hour to agree on the 16 in the ranking. Every group tends to need an extra 30 minutes. They need 90 minutes. So the individual takes 10 minutes. The group of 4 takes 90. But here's the breakthrough. Without fail, when they scored all the results, the highest scoring individual usually scores 10 points lower than the lowest scoring group. So there is no question it is harder to work when you have diversity of ideas and thoughts, but you always get a better answer. And that is what a leader has to create.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You have been very successful in your career, but at what point did you realize that you were successful and that you had become a leader that other people would look to you for advice and look to you as a role model?
I'll start by saying I still don't consider myself a successful leader. My mom and I laugh, and she once said, you were made up entirely of flaws stitched together by good intentions. Only a mother could tell a son that, and she's
Really?
right. But I would tell you that I learned something early in my career, that your title makes you a manager or a boss or a president or a mayor, but people will decide if you're a leader. And I watched my dad, when my dad became the mayor of our hometown of Canova, and he passed away in 1996 in his second term, but when he became mayor in his first term, he did something no other mayor of Canova had done. He rode the sanitation trucks every Tuesday with the drivers to pick up the trash. And one day I asked him, because I was working at the time with Pepsi, I said, Dad, why do you ride the sanitation trucks every week? And he said, Brad, 2 reasons. It's the best way to get to know your people, your team, by riding in the cab of the truck for 8 hours and hearing about their kids and their families and the things they're working through. And there's no better way to learn the community than by not looking at the front line, but looking at what's going on in the back of the house. And so I took that idea, and at the time I was working at Pepsi, and I managed 6 drivers, 6 Teamsters. And we had to get up at 6 in the morning, deliver soft drinks to the supermarkets, and get back in the evening and count the trucks and make sure that we had the right inventory. And I was in Michigan in the middle of winter, and I began to ride the trucks with all my drivers. And something magical happened. We started to win every single sales contest. Those drivers never forgot that boy from West Virginia was willing to get in the snow, get up at 6 in the morning, ride those trucks, and do anything I could to help them. And they paid me back. And I got promoted very quickly at Pepsi, not because I was good, but like Ben Ing said, I had the pleasure of working with great people who lifted me up. So that's the lesson that I think is most important, is your title makes you a manager. People will decide if you're a leader. And the way that you become a leader is you serve those that are on your team.
That's a great message for all of us. I remember hearing Colin Powell. We had him at a talk one time at my former institution, and he was telling the story about being the Secretary of State and how he would wander the building and he would go down and talk to the people in the building. And he went down to the basement where they parked the cars, and he was just kind of shooting the breeze with him. He says, these cars are all parked all one behind the other and side by side. So if you're way back in the back, you have to wait a long time for those cars to move out. He said, how do you decide who gets parked way back there and who gets parked in the front? And they said, oh, that's easy, General Powell. He said, when folks like you come in and talk to us and wave to us, we put you up in the front. Those that ignore us, we put them in the back. So he said it he said it always pays off to respect people, because what goes around comes around.
Yeah, well
So,
said.
Speaking of characteristics of leaders, what characteristics do you think that West Virginians naturally have that make them successful professionally?
This one's easy. Grit. If you look up the definition of grit, it's the combination of passion and perseverance in pursuit of a goal. And there's been a lot of studies done on this. There's actually a book called Grit by Angela Duckworth. But I'll tell you why it's so important. The Silicon Valley we all hear about. And for those who don't know a lot about California or Intuit, I share a campus with Google. I'm friends with Larry and Sergey, the co-founders of Google. Apple and Steve Jobs was just down the street. Steve, of course, has passed away, but I knew him and had a chance to interact with him. Elon Musk and Tesla, all of them. We're all right here in the same community. And the truth about the Silicon Valley is 90% of all those companies that you now read about failed on their first idea. And many times they failed on their second and third idea. They had to persevere, take the ideas that came out of those mistakes, and then figure out a new way to grow. And so everybody in the Silicon Valley is looking for one quality in an employee. Someone who's able to get up and dust themselves off and do it again. And West Virginians know how to do that. And especially Marshall sons and daughters who know how to rise from the ashes. So that is the number one characteristic that makes us special.
You spoke earlier about your accent, and I've got an accent too. Mine's a little further south. How can West Virginians overcome stigma and the typical stereotypes that people outside of West Virginia have about West Virginians?
You know, I've come to learn that you can't overcome it with words and trying to convince someone. You can only overcome it with deeds. And I'm listening to a book right now, Matthew Mcconaughey, the actor that we all know from either Lincoln car commercials or some of these fun romantic comedies like 10 Ways to Lose a Guy. He's a great actor, in my opinion. I like him. And he's got a book called Green Lights. And he had a quote in there that I think really resonates as a response to this question. He says, when you're frustrated because you're not being put on the starting team, then make the decision for them by doing something so spectacular that that choice is undeniable. They have to put you on the starting team. As West Virginians, we have to stop asking, when will you bring your jobs here? When will you open an office here? When will you do this? And we need to take our destiny in our own hands. We need to create the next businesses. We need to show them that we are so magical that they should never deny hiring us. And we do that through our deeds, not our words. That will overcome our stereotypes. There will be less reality TV shows about us doing things that people can make fun of. And there's going to be more case studies and shows about how West Virginia has built the next chapter for this entire country. And we're capable of doing it. We've done it before, and we'll do it again.
I have one more question, and then we're going to let Sarah take some questions from the audience. And this last one, I think, is very important for our students, and it is, why does West Virginia need its students to stay in the state and help write the next chapter?
Oh my gosh. This is my life passion now that I've stepped out of being CEO. And I'll start with my own lessons. I shared that I spent the first 22 years of my life dreaming of a way out, and every day since dreaming of a way back. I tell you, young men and women, there's a reason why the song says almost heaven. I have lived in 10 states and I have traveled the world. And West Virginia is the envy of all the places that I've been. And there's a reason why grass is always greener on the other side. That's because there's more manure over there that fertilizes the grass. So why is it important for you to stay? because you are our hope of today. You are our leaders of tomorrow. You are the result of your parents' love and sacrifice. And you are coming out with the skills of grit and perseverance, which is what's required by every company who's trying to hire great employees. But your state right now is embracing a new chapter. We're trying to become the startup state, just like Israel and Ireland and France and India and all these great countries that are reimagining themselves have done. And we're going to be investing in things that will allow you to not have to move if you don't want to. Or if you do move, to be able to come back and still be able to raise a family. And so you're right on the ground floor. And I hope you'll embrace it and take advantage of it. And this design thinking workshop you're going to go through is the magic skeleton key. That's what Silicon Valley used to create Tesla and Google and Intuit and Apple. And you're going to be taught those techniques. And that's all you need to create the next great company right there.
Thank you. Sarah, do you have some questions from the audience for us?
Yes, President Gilbert, we have a couple. One is about internships. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of internships or summer jobs while we're attending like senior year of high school, getting ready to go into the training program or college?
I can, and I'll tell you, there's two sides of the coin on this. On one side of the coin, I think we overschedule our students, and students put too much pressure on themselves to be in every club, every sports or athletic event, take internships, and they don't enjoy life. And I tell you, in hindsight, that's a big mistake, because life is to be lived, not to be endured. And so on one hand, I think it's important just to make sure that you're doing an internship for the right reason, which is the other side of the coin. The most powerful learning that you'll ever have is not academic, it's experiential. In fact, this design thinking workshop that you're going to go through this afternoon combines learning, like President Gilbert described, with doing. And the faster you do and the faster you fail, the more successful you become. Albert Einstein took 10,006 attempts to act. I mean, not Albert Einstein, Thomas Edison, 10,006 attempts to invent the light bulb. And someone asked him how it felt to fail 10,005 times. And he laughed and he said, hey, I didn't fail 10,005 times. I proved 10,005 ways it wasn't going to work. And so internships allow you to take what you're learning in school and test drive it. And you're going to find out that sometimes stuff doesn't work in the real world. I found that out. That doesn't make the school bad. It means that things are changing so fast in the real world that sometimes not everything that we teach actually will work the way it's supposed to, but you can quickly adjust and make the right answer. So I think internships are important to apply your knowledge and learn, but don't overschedule yourself. Give yourself a little break along the way, because life is to be lived.
I thoroughly agree. You need to enjoy every day and live every day like it's your last.
Good.
Okay, great advice. We have a question. They're wanting, Brad, your opinion of new green technology.
First of all, I don't want to get into a political debate because everyone is entitled to their opinion, and I tend to defer to the science. And, you know, even though there are lots of people that can point to different articles, the scientific community in large mass, in the high 90%, agree that we are on a collision course with climate. Some of this is a natural cycle that's happened in the earth all the way back to the early days. The other is man-made, where we've accelerated it because we've created things. And it's not the first time it happened in the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, when we so polluted the sky with all the fog that London, for a period of time, I mean, it was a crisis that Winston Churchill had to lead the country through. So we know that we can do these things to the climate, but we can also undo them. And I think this is where we have to be thoughtful. And just as we continue to sustain our current path, we need to be good at reimagining cleaner and better ways of doing it, and then slowly make that transition. And when I say slowly, it should be at the pace necessary to preserve the climate. But we shouldn't deny the fact that we're going to have to change. If you go all the way back to the 1900s, more than 70% of people in the United States were farmers. Today, less than 1% are farmers. And the rest of us have learned how to make a living in other ways. The same thing's going to happen with clean energy and those who are working in the older energies. We'll find ways to adapt, but we have to preserve the climate and the earth in which we live. or we're actually going to be on a collision course that's not going to lead to a good outcome.
Okay. For many startups, funding is a challenge. What advice do you have for future entrepreneurs as they're starting out from scratch? And how can communities help support these entrepreneurs?
Yeah, this is a question I get a lot when I'm working with young entrepreneurs and startups. And I'll tell you something that's going to sound very hollow, but then I'll give you how to navigate in the short term. Money always follows good ideas. Now, the problem is good ideas don't always have a spotlight shined on them or shown on them. So if you look at venture capital money, which are the people who will invest in startups, last year, 75% of all the venture capital money went to 3 states, California, New York, and Massachusetts. So even though great ideas are equally distributed across all 50 states and quite frankly around the world, venture capitalists only tend to see those things really close to their office. That's why we're investing so much in West Virginia with design thinking, with what Marshall's doing with the business school, how we're trying to shine the light on all these great competitions we're doing so our students' ideas get exposed to more people. And believe me, the money will come because venture capitalists are in business to do one thing, find good ideas. And so if you have a great idea, they're going to find you, and we just have to shine a spotlight on you. Now, what do you do in the meantime? Almost every single entrepreneur and startup started out bootstrapping. Our founder, Scott Cook, tried really hard to get a venture capital company to fund him, and he couldn't. He ended up borrowing money from his mom and dad and his friends and almost went bankrupt. For 3 weeks, employees worked with no payroll. Fast forward 38 years, we are a Fortune 500 company, and Scott Cook is on the Forbes 400 most wealthiest men in the world. And it's because once he proved success, everyone then wanted to invest in him. So what do? Find the way to do it the scrappiest, the cheapest you can, and still prove that it is a good idea. Get borrowing money from friends and family if you can, and then make sure that someone who can shine a spotlight on you, like Ben Ng and President Gilbert and Dean Avi at one of these business competitions, showcases your work, and then they will come in like vultures. Everyone will want to invest in you. So that's the best thing to do, is do it cheap and scrappy and know that the money will come.
I think that's excellent. The next question is really for both you and President Gilbert. Clearly, we've just had an election and we had record participation, which is phenomenal on all sides. But as a good leader, how do you keep from getting emotionally entangled? Like, how could you stay above the rhetoric and represent both sides and keep that balance there?
President Gilbert, would you like to start first?
Sure, I'll start. I think as a leader, particularly if you're in the public institution like I am, that it's very important to be balanced and fair in everything that you do. And I don't express my personal opinions in the public sphere unless they have a bearing on the university and the future of the university and its students. So I try to stay detached as much as I can from politics. I have been a real proponent of the First Amendment here. I believe that everyone should have an opportunity to express their ideas. We promote civility at Marshall, meaning that you can disagree, but we're going to do so in a respectful and in a manner that does not involve accusing each other of having the wrong position, but being respectful of each other. We have a creed at Marshall that emphasizes that respect. So I try to think about that. I try to look at my personal faith as a way to ground me in how to treat other people. I want them to treat me as I would treat them. So I don't really judge people for their views. Sometimes when I disagree with them, I think back to my Sunday school when they told me, if you hate the sin and not the sinner. So I always try to keep that in mind. It's that I never try to take someone's political views and attach that to them as a person, but view that more as their opinion.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I am in a very similar place as President Gilbert, Sarah. I'll start. I've got 3 quick points on this. The first is, in the 1990s, the world convened the greatest scientists to do something called the Human Genome Project, where they decoded the human DNA for the first time. And they were surprised at what they learned, that 99.8% of human DNA is identical in every one of us. Only 0.2% makes us black or white, male or female, or anything else. And we tend to spend our lives focused on that 0.2% instead of the 99.8. So the first thing you do, I think, is just to embrace what we have in common. The second is, there's an old proverb, seek to understand before you seek to be understood, which is listen before you speak. And there is a Netflix show right now called Social Dilemma. And I live in the Silicon Valley, and I can tell you this is true because I've sat and talked to the leaders who built these companies. If you Google climate change in California, the first thing that comes up is crisis. If you Google climate change in some other part of the country, the first thing that comes up is hoax. What happens is these algorithms are built to reinforce whatever you tend to click on the most, and then reinforce that point of view to where you start to believe that is a fact. And the only way you learn there's another perspective is to listen to somebody else before you speak. And then the last thing I would tell you is, I think we need to remember that our first name is United States. And we need to remember the first name goes along with the last name. And I think those three things are the things that reinforce what President Gilbert said. And that's the way I try to navigate it.
I think that's so true. As a political scientist myself and a journalist, I tell students all the time, if you're a political scientist, we want you to be political. We want you to use that critical thinking skill set, analyze, look at statistics, stats, but don't be partisan in a way that don't hold grudges. Build those bridges, because it takes all of us to govern. So I think that's great insight from both you and the president. And we have time for about a couple more questions. Okay. One is, can you talk about a healthy work-life balance for students that head off to college and ultimately in the workplace?
Is that for me or for President Gilbert?
Yeah, you first, sir.
Okay. Yeah, there's actually two things I've learned in time, and I've learned these from some really special people. Bill Campbell, if you ever want to read a great book, it's called The $1 Trillion Coach. Bill Campbell started out as a college football coach and went on to become an icon in the Silicon Valley. He was Steve Jobs' mentor. He was Larry and Sergey's mentor at Google. He's Jeff Bezos' mentor at Apple. He was mine for more than a decade, and he was also our chairman of the board. And I benefited from him coaching me every 2 weeks. And he had two very simple philosophies. The first is, there are times of war and there are times of peace, and good generals know what time it is. And so think about your university or your high school experiences. When it's exam time, even though your friends want you to go out and do something, when we're allowed to do that and it's not social distancing, sometimes you have to say, I'm sorry, I've got to study. That's times of war, and you sacrifice. And then times of peace are when it's summertime and that bell rings and that last exam's taken, you let your freak flag fly. The same thing happens in work. You want to know when it's time to get a project done, get the code written, ship a new product. And then there's times when you can be home and spend time with family when you get to that stage in your life. So know if it's times of war and times of peace. The second, though, is there are moments in your life that are made of crystal and there are moments made of rubber. And you never want to ever prioritize anything over crystal. And this is an example. My youngest daughter was a dancer. She would have 20 dance recitals every dance season. She wanted daddy at every single recital. And sometimes I would have a board meeting or I'd be on a plane in Italy and it would break my heart and she would cry. But those were made of rubber. If I missed a dance recital, it would bounce. And next week was another dance recital and I would be in the audience and she would forget that I had missed that other one. But then came her prom or her homecoming. And if I dropped that, it shattered. I never got it back. So I never took a plane and I never had a board meeting when there was a crystal moment in my life. Always prioritize crystal moments, but realize you can't be at everything and you got to be able to know if it's times of war or times of peace.
I think that's wonderful. President Gilbert, do you have any comments on work-life balance?
Well, I think you've got to take time for yourself. I try to take time for myself every morning for some reflection, and I think it's important to reinforce your values, reinforce your ideas, and get yourself charged up for the day. And I spend about 10 or 15 minutes every morning, meditation, prayer, whatever you want to do. And I think it's important that you have relationships with people that you can feel refreshed and energized by other individuals, even in your work. So I think an approach to putting some pleasure in your work is important. I've enjoyed going to work every day of my life, and I think that's what one of the keys to work-life balance is make sure that your work is something that you love, and then play hard and work hard. That's always been my motto.
I love that answer.
Yep, that's spot on. Okay, so we're gonna finish up on this final kind of final thoughts, final question. We have a lot of juniors and seniors, high school juniors and seniors on the line with us today. And what advice do you give them as they look forward, whether they're going into training or college, and what can you offer them in closing?
Wow, this is a really important time in your life. And there is a famous quote by Mark Twain who said, the two most important days in your life are the day that you're born and the day that you discover why. And it's a really good time for you to sit back and think about your why, your purpose, what you want to do in life, what you want to achieve. Now, this feels very daunting, and I'm going to give you an easy way to do that. But it's not what major are you going to declare. In fact, you're going to discover something, and I say this with all due respect, and President Gilbert's lived this, I'm sure, in his life. No one's ever going to ask you what was your major after your first job interview. Because in life, you're going to learn other things, and you're going to kind of go in different directions. And some people who think they're going to be lawyers end up being doctors. I mean, it's just natural. We learn and grow. But there is a really good book. And the name of the book, and I'm going to say it slowly because I think it's a book that I wished I would have had at your age. And I've asked both of my daughters to read, and I recommend it to everybody. It's called The Defining Decade. And the rest of the title, The Defining Decade, Why Your 20s Matter and How to Make the Most of Them Now. The author is Meg Jay, J-A-Y. Now, I realize I'm talking to juniors and sophomores who may be 16 and 17, but this is about what you can do now. So when you're in your 20s, you know the kinds of questions to ask yourself. And she even has exercises that will help you think about what things may be a good pursuit for you. And I just think it's a wonderful book. But for me, it's about living a life that matters. When you're all done, they're not going to care how much money you make, what title you had, whether or not you got ranked on a magazine's top 100 or top 6. They're going to remember whether or not you did something that mattered for somebody else, and you want to have that impact in life. So I hope you'll read the book because it really does help you give some purpose and give you some grounding on what you can achieve.
President Gilbert, any final thoughts?
Well, I would just say to keep your eyes open. That's one thing that I've always done. Many times the door is knocked upon and people ignore it. There are opportunities out there. And if you keep your eyes open, be aware of them and pursue those ideas and those opportunities, because I've seen so many people that get so focused on one thing that they aren't aware of the opportunities that are presented to them. So I've always been opportunistic, always pursued lots of things. Sometimes I don't go down that route, but if you don't try things out, as Brad was saying earlier, you may not discover something that you really like. So I say keep your eyes open and be opportunistic to a certain degree.
Awesome.
That's great. Well, both of you gentlemen, thank you so very much. This has been very impactful and educational and really just a delight. So Brad, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. We appreciate the insight.
My privilege. I was humbled and honored. And President Gilbert, Sarah, thank you for inviting me so much. And to all the students, you're our pride and joy. I'm blown away by everything you're doing, and I cannot wait to see you put your dent in the universe.
Thank you so much. And Mr. President, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with Brad and with you. So thank you.
Thank you.